We are here today to start our workshop sessions. I am so thrilled to have with me Chris Mirabile. He's the CEO of NOVOS. As you've seen, they have a booth downstairs, so you can learn a lot more, but you can also do Q&A with us here. So we're going to do an Ask Me Anything. Thank you guys for being here. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Fantastic. And for everyone online who is streaming virtually, if you have questions, please feel free to add them in the chat, and we will have someone respectively sharing them with us, so we'll answer your questions here too. Okay, so with that said, let's get started. So Chris is the founder and CEO of NOVOS. It is a consumer platform committed to developing solutions for healthy aging and longevity. Chris is a serial entrepreneur and longevity expert. His interest in health began actually when he was 12 and evolved into a passion after he was cured of a brain tumor when he was 16. Chris had researched and integrated longevity practices and interventions into his life for more than 10 years. And he's achieved a biological age 13.6 years younger than his chronological age. And according to the Dunedin Pace Clock, is aging 31% slower biologically than chronologically. That's impressive.
I'm 65.
Yeah. So Chris and NOVOS have been featured in the New York Post, Daily Mail, Business Insider, and more. And you can follow Chris on social at Slow My Age, and NOVOS you can follow at NOVOS Labs. So without further ado, I welcome Chris. And so tell us, what is NOVOS and why did you start it?
Great question. So NOVOS is a consumer longevity biotech company. So if you imagine pharmaceutical biotech and over-the-counter supplements, there's a large divide between the two. And we wanted to take the best elements of both of them. So we're a lot more responsible with the scientific evidence behind our formulations. So not only do we base all of our formulations on hundreds of scientific studies and critical analysis of all of them, but then we also, after we put together the beta formulas before bringing them to market, we start doing some studies, in vitro studies, in vivo studies as well, and we prove out our formulations. So we provide basically three different values. So one is the formulations themselves. Two is biological age test kits. So you can track your progress with the formulations we provide, as well as the advice and guidance that we give. And the third thing is giving you that guidance and advice with different tools, digital tools. For example, we have something called Face Age, which leverages AI, where you can take a selfie and we then tell you how young you look, and skin health markers, as well as different ways to be able to improve the outcome of that. We have a survey where you can answer it and then receive personalized, individualized recommendations for the things that are most important, research-based, for you to work on to improve your longevity. So that's the foundation of what NOVOS is. Fantastic.
So tell us a little bit about differentiation. You know, what makes it different from other, not only supplement companies, but longevity companies in the space, and what's your unique approach?
Sure. So getting back to the research, with NOVOS Core, which is our foundational product, we filed for patents on this. The approach we took with this was to first do a DNA damage study. So iCore, which is downstairs, a CRO, they did a study for us where they looked at irradiation on DNA and the impact that NOVOS could have on DNA damage. And so that oxidative damage was reduced by as much as 77% with our formulation. We did another study at University of Bologna, which we haven't published yet, but we administered chemotherapeutics to human skin cells, specifically keratinocytes, and we are demonstrating a reduction in double-strand breaks of the DNA. We did another study looking at cellular senescence and basically the size of human senescent cells, and we compared it to rapamycin, the gold standard prescription drug in longevity, and we were able to demonstrate a reduction in the size of the senescent cells at the same order of magnitude as rapamycin. There's another study, which we haven't published yet, that was done at the Salk Institute that looks at a process known as oxytosis ferroptosis, which is associated with Alzheimer's disease, and we were able to reduce the oxytosis ferroptosis by a very significant margin. And finally, in a human case study, we gave NOVOS for 6 months to participants aged between, I believe, 39 and into their 70s, and we were able to reduce the biological pace of aging, according to Columbia and Duke University's Dunedin Pace Clock, by a statistically significant margin for 73% of the participants, and 0% of participants accelerated their aging. So 100% of people ended up in as good or most in a better place than before they started NOVOS Core and Boost, and they didn't change anything else to their lifestyle. So I think that distinguishes us from most companies that are just combining ingredients based on historical research, but then not being accountable to do the research themselves to prove it out.
So actually, this question came over the internet. So a little bit more about lifestyle. What are the most effective lifestyle-based interventions you've tried for improving health?
So, of course, I'm going to say NOVOS Core and Boost, but I truly do believe in it. I have an immediate relative in his 70s who started taking Core and Boost, and his biological age was -1 year before taking it, and after 6 months, it was -10 years. I don't personally have my results, but I expect I would have seen something similar. So these results that you mentioned earlier, which are according to the lab that does the testing, they were the best results they had ever seen. I don't think that I'm genetically in a good place for this, right? I had a brain tumor. I have obesity in my family. My mother passed away from cancer. So it's not genetic. So what could it be? I do exercise, yes. I do eat healthy. I do have good sleep hygiene, and I'm strict with my sleep. But a lot of people in this room do that as well. So what's the real core differentiator? I really do think that it is NOVOS Core and Boost. What I'd add in terms of specific to that question is, I think, of course, when it comes to nutrition, the timing of your meals is important, and throughout, the circadian rhythmicity of our eating habits, right? So you want to try to eat earlier in the day for fewer hours, compress the eating window. I personally eat for 8 hours out of the 24-hour day. I also am pretty much hypocaloric on maybe 5 out of 7 days a week. So I'm very strict with my diet on work days, which is very easy for me to do. It takes the thinking out of things. And then weekends, I live life. I have that pizza or that pasta or the tiramisu. I'm Italian-American, if you couldn't tell. And yeah, I live my life. And I think that also helps with like normalizing hormones, at least in my experience, right? Where I'm a little bit hypercaloric for a couple of days a week, and then I go back to being more longevity focused hypocaloric. And I think it's a good balance of quality of life as well as the benefits that you get for the longevity side.
Do you think the answer that you just gave also can be attributed to this next question? So I heard that you have better biological age results than Brian Johnson, and even some of the NOVOS customers are on the Rejuvenation Olympics leaderboard, which I'm sure some of you know about, with results that have surpassed his. So assuming you're not spending $2 million a year, how does the answer to the last question kind of play into this one?
Yeah, so if I had $2 million a year to spend on this, I wouldn't. I'd save it or put it towards a house or something. Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that you don't need to be a millionaire or billionaire to be able to integrate these lifestyle practices into your life. And it is something far more accessible than the press makes it out to be or than some influencers make it out to be. It's something that you can do for free, or you can even save money, because in some senses, maybe if you're spending less on food, you're eating fewer calories, right? You're actually saving money. You also don't need to go to the extremes with hormone therapies and blood transfers from your child. You don't need to do any of this stuff because, as you mentioned, my results are better, at least according to many of the different epigenetic biological age outputs. And we have customers who are ranking better on that leadership board based on taking only NOVOS Core and only NOVOS Boost. So that's the only distinguishing factor, right? Because we advise them not to change their lifestyle during the 6-month case study that I mentioned earlier. And without changing lifestyle, but only taking those 2 products, they were able to slow down their pace. So I do think that that's probably the biggest contributor.
So let's talk about the ingredients a little bit. What's your process for evaluating them, and the existing ones and new ones?
Sure. So we're the first company to take the approach of addressing all of the hallmarks of aging simultaneously. And so we first, of course, put together a list of all of the prospective ingredients, and we evaluate them one by one. And we look at all of the research, the power of that research. For example, is it something that was found to work in humans? Is it something that, of course, we can't measure specifically longevity in humans because of how long-lived we are, but we can look at other markers, surrogate markers, or we can look at different disease outcomes, for example. So if somebody takes a specific supplement, does it reduce the severity or likelihood of a specific disease? Of course, we can't say that outright for FDA reasons, but the research can indicate that. We also look to see if longevity or lifespan has been increased in more than one animal species, which is very important as well, because that hints at the process being evolutionarily conserved. It's something that makes its way from species to species and is most likely conserved in humans as well. And then we also look at things like dysergies, right? So that's a negative synergy. Is there anything that might actually negatively interact with each other? And we have a team of scientific advisors from Harvard and MIT and the Salk Institute, people like Dr. George Church and Matt Kaberlein, who review all of the research as we present it to them, and we get their feedback and tips for certain ingredients that maybe we end up taking out, like we took out quercetin, and certain ingredients to add in, like we added in calcium alpha-ketoglutarate at Matt Kaberlein's advice. So that's part of the process. There's more to it, but if you go to our website, and I believe it's under the science section, and you click on approach, you'll see there's literally 8 different filters that we put ingredients through before we actually then consider to start testing that formula.
Thank you for that. So I have a few more minutes, and would you like to ask a question?
Yes.
If you can speak up, and I will repeat it on the microphone.
Okay, yeah. Jump in here. I'm just curious, current size of your user base, so sample size for essentially your ongoing case.
The question is, what is the current sample size of the user base right now?
Sure. So for the case study, it was a small case study with 12 participants. We're also doing a clinical trial, which has, I believe, around 40 to 50 participants. That's being done on the West Coast. We're doing another clinical trial in the United Kingdom that's going to focus more on cardiovascular outcomes, and that is, I believe, 50 people. And then in terms of data that we're collecting internally, I can't give specifics in terms of the scale of it, but we do have thousands of people whose data we're analyzing in terms of things like whether it be epigenetic outputs or survey responses and so on.
Any other questions from the audience?
What's your take on precision supplementation and utilization? It's differently. So, what's your view on also supplements and other different?
Sure. The question is what my perspective is on precision supplementation, so testing-based supplementation. I think it really depends on what specifically you're testing for. So when it comes to, we categorize supplements in very general terms. You have your general health supplements and then longevity supplements. Of course, you have other things like athletic supplements and so on, but for the sake of just overall health and longevity, it's just those 2 categories. So when you think about general health supplements, these are the essential nutrients. These are things like vitamin A, E, D, K, the fat-soluble vitamins, and then the water-soluble ones like the Bs and C and so on. And our perspective on that is that although you could try to do the precision approach with it, that it's not really necessary. First of all, practically everyone is taking in inadequate levels of at least one nutrient, at least one, most likely potassium. We should have multiple grams of it, and even if you're eating like a vegan diet, you might still be deficient in potassium. But if you go down the list of other nutrients like selenium or iodine or choline, which is oftentimes forgotten, choline, but it's very important for the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, for preventing fatty liver, and so on. We're almost all deficient in at least one of those. And this is based on NHANES data, the NHANES study data. So our perspective is that everyone should just be supplementing with a general health multivitamin, essentially, right? So a high quality one, it's not like a Centrum. It would be something of a higher quality brand like Thorne or Life Extension. But make sure that you're getting those. And so the only risk you run is overdosing on fat-soluble vitamins, but you can still do it within a range where you don't really run the risk of overdosing. And water-soluble vitamins, you will pee out. So we don't think that it's really necessary for that. Now, there are exceptions like iron, for example. You don't want to overdose on iron. We have an article that talks about how too much iron. There's very like a linear correlation for iron and cancer risk. You can read that article on our blog. So you don't want iron to be too high. But of course, you don't want to be anemic and it's too low because both extremes are going to cause negative health outcomes. So something like that you might want to measure. So it really depends. But that's just general supplements. Of course, if we talk about specific use cases, then precision approaches definitely would make sense.
So we are actually about to run out of time. I will take your question, and please know that you can go down to the NOVOS booth at any point and ask questions to them directly. And for those of you online, there are also opportunities to connect with NOVOS representatives on the app, and you can ask them questions there. So sir, yeah, please, we'll take your question, then we'll finish up and start with OneSkin.
I was looking at some of the substances in the NOVOS, and on some there are clinical studies, on others it is just on animals and lab studies. So it could work in humans too, or maybe not.
Repeat the question.
For some of them.
Sure. The question is with specific ingredients that may not have clinical human study data. You know, I guess you're essentially asking what makes us convinced that it might have a favorable response, or just making this a comment. So I believe all of the ingredients have human studies associated. They're not necessarily longevity studies, but there's human research for all of the ingredients, whether it be glucosamine or lithium, or you go down the list. And so certain ingredients, you know, might fall a little bit short of that human longevity specific study. But that's why with those 8 filters that we put the ingredients through, and looking at, for example, is it something that extends lifespan in multiple animal species? If we check that box off, then that's encouraging for us to believe that it's most likely evolutionarily conserved in humans. If it is having health span implications, positive health span implications in humans, which you know, observational studies might find with something like glucosamine, for example, then that is something that's adequate for us to determine that it is most likely having favorable effects on human health span and lifespan. Which, you know, let's not forget that longevity is not purely lifespan. It is largely lifespan, but it's also extending health span as well, right? So it's about living as healthy as possible for as long as you possibly can. It's not simply maximizing, you know, a species lifespan. So we wanted to make sure we incorporate all of that into the formulation.
I want to thank you so much, Chris, for joining us, and for NOVOS to support Lifespan.io. A quick fun fact, if you want to share with them about how we're working together.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So when I was conceiving of this idea all the way back in 2018, I met with members of the Lifespan.io team like Keith and Oliver and brainstormed with them. And back then the idea was called the poly pill. So creating one pill to be able to address the hallmarks. We quickly found out that it would take too many ingredients to fit it into one pill. It would be basically a dozen pills. And so we decided to make it into a drink mix instead, because we're not cheap with our ingredients. We have 6.9 grams of actives in our formulation, whereas most supplements are only containing 500 milligrams or 1 gram. So, the Lifespan has an equity share in NOVOS, which was granted to them at the very beginning. And then we also do a revenue share as well to support the organization.
Thank you so much for that, and we're thrilled to be partnering with you, and thank you for being here today. And a round of applause for Chris and NOVOS. Thank you so much.